Hiya, pal!
The legends are true! Giants!
My name is Fred.
Storm giants!
Welcome back to Inquiry, everyone. Hope you're all good. Sorry about the silly intro, but thought it would be a fun way to introduce this deck I'm showcasing today that utilises a very cool card from Reign of Jafar, Mickey Mouse, Giant Mouse. This deck is definitely more of a casual deck than our last video, but it's a lot of fun to play and has another set 8 inclusion, Fred, giant sized. Now Mickey Mouse Giant Mouse is a 10 cost uninkable with 10 strength, 10 willpower and quest for 5, so he really is the ultimate card, but it's quite difficult to get out onto the board. But the aim of this deck is to get our giant Mickey Mouse out on turn 5, and we have a couple of ways to do that. There's the Return of Hercules, which if you don't know is a 5 cost inkable action that allows you to play any character card from your hand for free. The downside being your opponent can do the same. However, the hope and likelihood is your opponent's not going to have as powerful cards in their hand as yours, which is why we also have strong top end cards like Clarabelle, Pete, Giant Tink and the new Fred to make the most of the Return of Hercules. That's not the only way we can pull off a Giant Mouse though. Hades Double Dealer's in the deck, which is a set 4 legendary that's a 4 cost inkable and has the ability to exert to banish one of our characters, then play a character with the same name for free. And as you'll notice, we have 4 different 1-drops in the deck that just happen to have the same name as our big cards at the other end. So we can play a mixture of Clarabelle, Fred, Pete and Mickey in the early game, play a Hades, and then whichever big card we have in our hand on turn 5, use the ability for basically a shift that's free. Some really fun things that we can do with this deck is using the Hades ability and shifting something else on the same turn, potentially giving you a Mickey and a Clarabelle on the board on turn 5. Another strong option is Hades ability and Return of Hercules in the same turn, which could in theory get 2 giant Mickeys on the board. This one I haven't managed to pull off yet, as it would require some pretty perfect card draws. But this deck's not just a combo deck that relies on these high rolly lines of play. As you'll notice, these big threats, Pete, Clarabelle and Fred, are also all shift lines that we can play more naturally on curve. One of the most consistent lines I've found with the deck is any 1-drop, followed up with an Ursula, which we all know how strong Ursula can be, taking the removal from your opponent, into a Pete Games Referee, and then shifting Pete on turn 4, then followed up by either a turn 5 shift on whichever 1-drop you played, or a Return of Hercules. And you don't really need the stars to align for this to happen. Another piece of the puzzle that makes this deck more consistent is Morph. With 14 Floodborns in the deck, we can shift any one of them onto Morph, which can be really helpful when not finding the exact lines of play we need. Next up I want to talk about Fred Giant Sized, a new card for Reign of Jafar which I really like in this deck. Whether we shift Fred, play him for free with Hades or play him for free with Return of Hercules, once he's out on the board he's questing for free, and whenever he quests you can reveal cards in your deck until you find a Floodborn character and put them into your hand. This way in the late game we can consistently put our big threats on the board turn after turn. Other deck inclusions I haven't mentioned yet are Mr. Smee and Tink. Smee is in here just for some more reliable questing power and something else for our opponent to have to deal with on the board. In the early game we don't really want to turn the 1-drop sideways as they do more for us as ready shift threats and Hades targets. Mr. Smee allows us to make some more challenges if needed or just start questing for a little bit more early game pressure. Tinkerbell on the other hand is another shift option for Morph. I chose Tink as turn 4 can be a tricky one for us if we miss Pete Space Pirate or Hades, so Tink is just another level of reliability, and she's a giant so fits the theme of the deck well. There are so many other Floodborns you can choose from, as Tink's definitely a flex slot. Prince Philip, John Silver, Cinderella, even Arthur are options I'd recommend, but there's so many great options that could all be personal preference. In terms of songs, we only have 3 copies of A Whole New World. Clarabelle is the only real draw option in the deck, so A Whole New World can be sang by Pete Space Pirate or Tink in order to refill our hand if we can't find the Return of Hercules Giant Mouse play. This of course gives our opponent a fresh hand, but we're really not too bothered by what the opponent's doing with this deck, as they have to keep coming up with answers for these really powerful cards like Pete and Giant Mouse. One thing the deck's really weak into would be targeted removal that returns cards to our hand or puts them into our inkwell. One thing we could add to counter this would be dodge, which could give our big threats ward and evasive. However, I didn't include it in this build as it's mostly just for a bit of fun, and if your opponent has no answer to Mickey, you basically just win the game. Oh, there's also a cheeky copy of You Came Back in here. This is for 2 reasons, one being you can ready a Mickey Mouse to gain 10 lore in 1 turn with him, which is great, but quite unlikely to pull off. The other, and one I've used a couple of times now, is readying the Giant Fred to reuse his ability and put 2 Floodborns in our hand and quest for 6 with him. My big tips for when piloting this deck is to prioritise finding Ursula in your mulligan, as like I mentioned, she takes away our opponent's removal, which ensures our 1-drops and morphs are safer from things like Let the Storm Rage on. Return of Hercules is another thing to look out for in the mulligan, as it's always inkable if we draw another, but it's our best bet of getting out one of those big cards on turn 5. Other than that, the uninkable count's really low, so it's actually quite forgiving on dodgy mulligans and a little misplay here and there. Just try and flood the board with 1-drops and morphs, and your opponent will never know what to target. This deck is honestly so much fun when it works, and I hope you have a great time trying it out. There's definitely some optimization you can make, like Beast for example, but it's all personal preference, which is another thing that's so good about the deck. You could try out the new Floodborn Hook, or any other shift lines you've been wanting to test out. I'm going to be playing this deck once I get my hands on some giant Mickeys and Freds, so if you'd like to see some gameplay, it'll be coming to the channel very soon. And that wraps things up nicely. Hopefully you enjoyed the deck, and if you do give it a go, let me know what changes you make in the comments. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time for another video.